One, Johnny Patterson, the world famous clown, and the other, the man who kept his story alive for many years and keeps history alive in the town of Tralee. A great storyteller in the oral tradition, and he's also an author. And the man is Shawn of Oak Park in Tralee, County Kerry. So we're here to celebrate the lives of these two men. Johnny Patterson, of course, buried here, and we'll tell you the story that led him to be buried here amongst the great and the good of Tralee town. And of course, Shawn Joseph we'll deal with first, and it was Shawn gave me a great interest in, or stimulated my interest in history, and because when we were going to school we learned history, but we always learned it in a way that was always influenced by the bias of the teacher that was teaching it, and of course the cruelty that was administered under. But Shawn Joseph delivers the story in only the way somebody with a love of history and an unbiased version always came across. I will take you on two journeys this morning, one through the life of, firstly the life of Shawn Joseph, and secondly we'll tell you the story of Johnny Patterson and how he ended up to be here in Tralee, starting out in County Clare and ending up here after travelling the world as a circus clown, how he ended up here back in the spot we're standing in now, the new burying ground in Oakview in Tralee, County Kerry. It was in a place called Baltavin near Kilmiley, within the sounds of the bells of this church. In the year 1935, Shawn Joseph O'Connor was born, and this was his stomping ground as he was growing up. It was here he got his love of history. At his mother's knee, he got she had a great graw. Graw is an Irish word meaning love. She had a great love for the Irish language, and she passed that on to Shawn Joseph. It was at her knee he gained a love for the Irish language and Irish culture. And it was this place that shaped him. And he went to school in the Abbey-Dorney, Killahan school, not far from here, in the parish of Abbey-Dorney. And it was here, years later, that he inspired him to write the book about the history of Kilmiley. Kilmiley to the rescue. And at the top left-hand corner of the book there is a nod, if you like, to the Nave Erk, Saint Erk of Kilmiley. And Bishop Erk, of course, was the bishop who baptised Saint Brendan the Navigator. And on the lower right-hand corner is the two hurleys, sticks that are used for the game of hurling. And of course he had a great love for hurling as well. In actual fact, at his son's wedding in Galway would be a place of great hurling heroes. He remarked in his wedding speech that they didn't play hurling in Kerry for the honours, they played it for the passion and the love. And to explain for those of you who wouldn't be familiar with the game hurling, it's the sticks I have shown you here in the front of Shawn Joseph's book. 15 players on each team go out into the field, and the ball that you see here is thrown in, and the 30 players go at it, hammer and tongs for over an hour and a half. The game replaces old battles long ago between rival groups and rival factions. A game of great skill. And we go from here now in Kilmiley, just looking at Shawn Joseph's book for the last time, Kilmiley to the Rescue. It was here also that Shawn Joseph, who lived on a small farm, and his love of farming also led him to be the secretary of the Irish Farmers Association, the IFA, and the National Farmers Association, which it was at the time. The now octogenarian, this is June in 2020. Shawn Joseph describes himself as coming from a small farm. Of course, farmers never tell you the truth, because every farmer, even the ranch style farmers, describe themselves as small farmers. It was during his time in Kilmiley he learnt of his great grandfather, Shawn O'Brien, and Shawn, of course, his great grandfather was a great poet, prolific poetry writer, and he had his poems published in later years, and he wrote and taught school in the Irish language, and he taught Shawn O'Brien taught hedge schools. The hedge school were schools that were underground, teaching the Irish language and culture, and of course the teachers of hedge schools at the time did as much for the freedom of Ireland as did the people who fought and died, because he gave up his life to teach, and he believed education was the road to freedom. And Shawn, with the O'Connors, which O'Connor, Shawn's surname translates to O'Connor, the O'Connors around the world gathered together to erect a plaque here in Ballymacandrew, the home place of Shawnee Brennan. And I must say now that Shawn Joseph O'Connor is an Irish language scholar, and I have not a great grasp of the Irish language. Líl Moran Fucklagum, which translate to I don't have too many words. So the Irish words I hope I'm pronouncing in the way they should be pronounced, the way Shawn Joseph would like me to pronounce them. The inscription on the monument here to Shawnee Brennan is taken from a verse of his poem, but something I like best is a translation by Shawn Joseph of words of a poem written by the great poet, and it's in English. It says, "The land is so fertile from here to Kilmiley that it would grow garsoons as tall as the steeple." And of course the steeple referred to in those two lines was the steeple at the tower in Ratu in Ballyduff. Shawn took a great pride in the fact that many of his great-great-grandfather's poems were published by Professor Padraig de Brún in 1980, and many of them were lost, of course, were burnt, not accidentally, but not knowing their value. The son of the great poet who died, and his widow, in her grief, she burnt many of the poems. It's an awful loss. And of course, the Brennan, Ibrenan, Shawn, died in poverty. He gave his life to educating the youth when the language was banned and schools went underground. Is it any wonder that Shawn Joseph O'Connor has such passion for the Irish language and culture? We have a saying in Ireland that it's in the blood. It was along this road Shawn Joseph O'Connor traipsed every morning as he made his way to school in the parish of Abbeydorney. And it was here at Knockbrack, the junction where an event took place where Michael Nolan was killed during an attack, what was an attack on an attempt to frighten the local magistrate, Mr. Wynne. Mr. Wynne was on his way from Tralee here to going to Causeway for a petty sessions, and the Mike Nolan with a troop from the Artfert Republican Company, they attacked him here. Didn't attack him, but were about to threaten him when everything went horribly wrong, and everybody started shooting. And when it was all over, Mike Nolan had fallen here, fatally wounded. And Shawn Joseph spent many years and asking to have this spot marked where Nolan fell, because it was an extremely important event in the local history. And he was delighted to know that the community here erected this memorial, which is to be replaced, I think is to be replaced at a later stage by something more permanent. But the monument, that's this little Celtic cross now, marks the spot. And of course the Easter lily is there, and as a rosary beads hangs from the cross as a sign that somebody has prayed here and left the rosary beads as a mark of respect. And when Nolan fell here, his comrades buried him a short distance away quickly, in case the forces of the Crown found the body. And they came back later and took him again to Ballyhaig, where they interred him for the second time in what they thought was a family tomb, only to realise later that week that they had put him in the wrong tomb, and he was resurrected again and reinterred for the final time, buried 3 times after the events here at Knockbrack. Another great passion of Shawn Joseph. Shawn Joseph says the story of Roger Casement, and when Casement came ashore here in Bannastrand on Good Friday 1916 to take part in the rising, the 1916 uprising, he came ashore with 2 more people, a man by the name of Bailey and a man by the name of Monteith, Robert Monteith. And in the 1950s, Monteith returned to Ireland and pointed out the spot here in lonely Bannastrand where Casement himself and Bailey came ashore on that fateful day. And he was given a civic reception by the local council in the 1950s when he returned here. And he went back to America and wrote a letter to the Kerryman expressing disappointment at the sacrifice that Casement had made for Ireland, giving his life and coming ashore here in Bannabeach, that the spot wasn't marked with some kind of memorial. And Shawn Joseph took up the cudgel, so to speak, and wrote letters and was very vociferous in his attempts to get the memorial erected here, and eventually he did, and he took some great pride. And it was first here I met him on one of his Easter weekend tours. He always conducted some kind of ceremony here, and the Easter weekend, either a guided tour or a lecture here at the base of this memorial to Roger Casement. This is a photograph of Shawn Joseph O'Connor taken at the monument at Bannerstrand, and the face tells it all, the expressions of pride and that he was part of the group that achieved the erection of this monument. After doing his leaving cert in the Green Secondary School in Tralee with the Irish Christian brothers, Shawn Joseph, on graduation, on gaining his leaving cert, started work here in the CWS Bacon Factory in Tralee, and in later years when it closed he went from here to Denny's Bacon Factory, and it was during his time here in the Bacon Factory in Tralee he won the heart of the fair maiden from Oak Park, Dawn Guinness. And of course I was talking to somebody one time about Shawn Joseph, and working here they said an honest man amongst a den of rascals and rogues. It was here along the Oak Park Road Shawn Joseph courted Dawn Guinness during those years, and they went on to have 4 children: Breen, who lives in America, Rory, who lives in Middleton, Fiona, who lives in Killarney, only out the road, and Aoife, who lives in Tralee. And it's a great source of pride to both Shawn Joseph and Dawn that each of their children has a love for the Irish language and speaks it daily. As I'm filming this now, the morning has turned pretty bad and you can hear the rain as we speak about Shawn Joseph O'Connor from Kilmiley in County Kerry, great historian and speaker of the Irish language, propagator of the language and the history and culture. And on many occasions when the history books are written about the great men of Ireland, the wives become a footnote in the pages of the history books. However, in the case of Dawn and Shawn Joseph, Dawn supported him in all his endeavours down through the years, and she has a great history interest as much as Shawn Joseph has. And they both work well hand in hand. On moving into Tralee after school, Shawn Joseph joined the Irish Language and Cultural Organisation Cunra na Gaeilge, and the Cunra na Gaeilge, he got together with Pádraig Mac Argus, another Tralee man at the time, and Pádraig had a dream of opening a school to teach through the medium of the Irish language, and himself and Shawn Joseph formed a group, a committee, and they opened the first school here to teach through the medium of Irish in this place, which was formerly a Masonic lodge. The Duca's House was called, with Pádraig as chairman of the board of management and Shawn Joseph as secretary. They started here in 1978 with 12 pupils. The organisation has grown. They have a full-fledged primary school in Oak Park in Tralee, Skolvik Casement, and they have a secondary school in Ballymullen. And you can still see the Masonic sign over the stained glass window of Duca's House, where the Shawn Joseph and Pádraig started the first all-Irish speaking school. And finally we end our story here of Shawn Joseph O'Connacore and the entrance to what is going to be the new secondary Gaelscoil, the Irish speaking teaching through the medium of the Irish language, initially set up by Padraig MacArgasa and Shawn Joseph and a hard-working committee behind them. This is the legacy they will leave behind. In a couple of short years there will be a new Irish-speaking secondary school here, a Gael Colasta. Often we hear about the history books are written about the men who died for Ireland. This morning we have heard the story of Shawn Joseph O'Connacore, who I think has lived for Ireland. He has dedicated his whole life to the history, the culture, the language of Ireland. We're back here now on the new burying ground in Oakview in Tralee to talk about the life of the great Irish circus clown Johnny Patterson. And it was Patterson's life story and his death which ended here in the graveyard in Oakview in Tralee, and saw the great international singing clown buried here in a borrowed grave. And this story always fascinated local Tralee historian Shawn Joseph O'Connacore, of which we spoke. And Shawn Joseph was instrumental in getting together a group who put this plaque up here in this graveyard to this singing clown. Patterson was born in Feakle in Kilbarrow, Feakle, County Clare in 1840. And shortly after his death, shortly after his birth, he was orphaned early on. And he went to live with his uncle, who raised him until he was 14 years of age. He joined the army in England. He joined as a drummer. At that stage you could join young in the band section of the army. The age restriction wasn't as strict as it was for others. And of course the significance of being a drummer in the British Army was that when we were young we used to see the American cowboy films, and the cavalry and the bugle was used as a method of signalling the troops what to do in the British Army in India and places where they were all over the world. At that time the drums, the instructions to the troops were tapped out in the drums, so it was a significant position in the army to be a drummer boy, which Johnny Patterson was. It was during this young period in his life that he wrote the song The Stone Outside Dan Murphy's Door, and before his death he had a huge repertoire of music still being sung almost 200 years after his birth. And of course this was part of the fascination for Shawn Joseph O'Connacore in following the story of this who became known as the singing clown. And of course many of us have heard The Stone Outside Dan Murphy's Door. It was a great favourite of my father's. There's a sweet garden spot in my memory, it's a place we were born and reared. It's been long years since then that I left it, but return there I will if I'm spared. Our friends and companions of childhood would assemble each night at the store, round Dan Murphy's shop. How often we'd stop on the stone outside Dan Murphy's door. Johnny Patterson was in the British Army for 5 years, and during this period of time you must remember that he probably played for Queen Victoria in many parades as a drummer boy. And he eventually, after 5 years in and around 1859-60, he bought himself out for the princely sum of £20, a significant amount of money at the time for a young man to get his hands on. But he had other ambitions to fulfill at that point in time. He became very popular on the circuit in England, and he became known as the Irish singing clown. Of course, being famous in Ireland, and he travelled to Liverpool in 1869 to join a circus, the Pablo Fank Circus. He was to perform with them in England, and he married a girl, Selina Hickey. And Selina Hickey was a trapeze artist, so he married into the circus family, if you like, and he encompassed all of that life. And 'twas at this time he wrote The Garden Where the Praties Grow. And this was a very prolific time in his life. He wrote Goodbye Johnny Dear, Bridget Donahue, and as I said, The Garden Where the Praties Grow. The Garden Where the Praties Grow was sung by many Irish and international entertainers down through the years, and some of his songs have been sung by the Irish tenors, Crystal Swing, the Cork Bass Band, and the Foster and Allen, the Irish bass duo. And The Garden Where the Praties Grow goes something like this. Have you ever been in love, me boys, and did you ever feel the pain? I'd rather be in jail, me boys, than fall in love again. Now the girl I loved was beautiful, I'd have you all to know that I met her in the garden where the praties grow. I'm sure Foster and Allen and the Irish tenors will forgive me for attempting to sing the songs of Johnny Patterson, the famous Irish clown. There are other songs where Shake Hands with Your Uncle Dan, of course, that was sung, as I mentioned, by the Crystal Swing, Dingle Puck Go, The Old Turf Fire, and Off to Philadelphia. In 1876, Johnny Patterson signed a contract with Cooper's and Bailey's Circus and travelled off to America. And it was during his time in America and seeing around him all the destitute Irish people that he wrote the immigrant song Goodbye Johnny Dear. And he had many successful years in America. However, it was said that the drink and the lifestyle he had was taking its toll. He was one of the highest paid entertainers in the world at that time. While he was in America with Cooper's and Bailey, he was billed as the Rambler from Clare. It was at this time he wrote Bridget Donahue and Typical Irishman, The Hat My Father Wore, and Barney O'Hare, A Good Roaring Fire, and Shake Hands with Your Uncle Dan. In 1872, Johnny Patterson and his wife Selina and their two daughters returned to Ireland for some time to build on his reputation and to enhance his repertoire, and he gained national fame. That was before his American journey and American Odyssey started. It was 1876 before Johnny finally travelled to America to take up a contract with Bailey and Cooper Circus. It was while in America at the height of his fame, the Rambler from Clare heard about the accidental death of his daughter Nora. She was killed in a circus accident by an elephant. It was seeing the destitution of the Irish in America and the poverty in which they were living, he wrote the Immigrant Song, which has been recorded by Margot O'Donnell in Ireland. And the song is Goodbye Johnny Dear. At the age of 45 and suffering the ravages of life in the circus and the demanding schedule he was keeping, and there were reports that he had become fond of the drink, he returned to Ireland, where he and an Australian by the name of Joe Keeley was the Australian's name, and they formed a circus partnership called Keel and Patterson and travelled extensively throughout Ireland. It was at this time he got in contact with Charles Stewart Parnell. He became a follower of Parnell and Parnell's ideas about the land league and the suffrage of the Irish peasant tenants under the landlord class, and they Parnell worked tirelessly to correct the imbalance, if you like. I would just like to say at this point in time as well that before Johnny Patterson left America, he was presented with a diamond encrusted brooch as a mark of respect and the esteem in which he was held in the American continent. On meeting Parnell, or on becoming a fan, if you like, of Parnell and Parnell's idea in relation to the Irish Land League, he wrote a song of reconciliation, and the song was called Do Your Best for One Another, and he was to sing that song. Unfortunately, that song was to lead to his death. That leads us back to his last resting place in Oakview in Tralee, County Kerry, Ireland, where he was to be laid to rest. In 1886, he heard that his wife had passed away in a workhouse in Belfast. Shortly after, he married a Bridget Murray from County Westmeath. His wife had died of consumption. Travelling all over Ireland with the Keel and Patterson Circus, on May the 27th, 1889, he arrived here in Tralee for a performance. Very much involved in the political situation at the times, he decided that on that evening that he would perform his song, Do the Best for One Another. And in the performance of the song, which is a song of reconciliation, he thought he might get the nationalists and royalist sides to come together in peace and harmony and work together for the good, and he believed that employment was the way to go, to create jobs and employment. That was his philosophy. And he entered the ring on that evening of the May the 27th, and in one hand he had a flag representing the Irish side, a green flag with the harp on it, and in the other hand he had a red flag with the crown on it representing the loyalist side, and he entered the ring singing his song. During his performance, at the end of his performance, he mingled the two flags together as a gesture of coming together of opposite parties. And with that, a riot broke out in the circus arena, and in an effort to save some circus equipment, he was hit on the head by an iron bar and kicked underground, and his 14-year-old son was a witness to this event. His son made a statement later telling of Dr. Fitzmaurice attending to him in the arena and patching him up and sending him back to his hotel, which was in Castle Street in Tralee, where he was staying, near what we know as the old picture drum. He attended to him there for the next few days, and on the Thursday his condition took a turn for the worst, and he was admitted to the Fever Hospital in Tralee by Dr. Fitzmaurice. On the last evening of May that year, the doctor said goodbye to Johnny Patterson at his bedside at the Fever Hospital, and he said, "I'll see you again, Johnny, and I'll see you tomorrow." And Johnny answered him with the words, "You may see me, doctor, but I won't see you." They were the last words heard from Johnny Patterson, the world famous clown and entertainer, circus performer. By the time Johnny Patterson passed away, his son and the circus had moved on to Adair in County Limerick. And on hearing of the death of his partner, Joe Keeley, announced it to the packed tent in Adair, and the crowd knelt and prayed and sang "Goodbye Johnny Dear" at a slow pace. Each year in Tralee there's a circus festival held, and but for the plaque here in the Oakview graveyard erected by Shawn O'Connor and his committee that he formed to remember the death of the famous clown, little would be remembered here of the great international world famous Rambler from Clare, as he rests here in a grave given to him by a man by the name of Ted Eager. His body was destined to lay in a pauper's grave. Potter's Field was the destination of Johnny Patterson, but for the intervention of Ted Eager, who had a family plot in this graveyard and allowed the Johnny Patterson to be buried here. The Evening Post, carrying the news of his death the following week, had made no mention of the melee that caused the death of Johnny Patterson. He was, what it says after the inquest, it was deemed that he died of pneumonia, that he was sick coming to Tralee. However, it was certainly the faction fight on the evening of the 27th of May contributed to his early demise. And I leave you with the words of two lines of the stone outside Dan Murphy door. The times we were young and the songs that we sung on the stones outside Dan Murphy's door.